Welcome back, everyone. Today we're finishing our series on Latino history by talking about Mendez v. Westminster, with a focus on the question, how has being Latino in America affected people's social opportunities? So I just want to start off with a quick do now. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created by the United Nations, 1. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. 2. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. 3. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Do you agree with this? Why or why not? Should access to education be something controlled by governments? So just take a second to reflect on these questions. Pause the video. Okay. So I agree with this generally because education should be a human right and it should be something that everyone's allowed to have. Um, and it's really important to be educated and so that you can, be part of society. So access to education shouldn't be something controlled by the government. It should be given to everyone. So I'm just going to start off with a general discussion of segregation in California. So, de facto segregation between white and Hispanic Californians began in the 1920s, and it was very similar to Jim Crow South. Restaurants refused service to Mexican Americans. They couldn't sit in main sections of movie theaters, and they could only swim in public pools on certain days. So, very similar to the anti black segregation that was occurring in the South at around the same time. And as you can see on the right, there were no Spanish or Mexican signs. We serve whites only all over the place. So education and schools followed the same pattern of segregation. Um, so California created a system of quote unquote Mexican schools, and you can see an image of students at lunch in one of these schools on the right here. More than 80% of Mexican American students went to these Mexican schools by 1940. California law didn't mandate segregation, but school boards claimed that having separate schools was beneficial because they claimed that many Mexican students or Hispanic students didn't speak English and that they were behind white students, even though this was demonstrably not true. These schools were in terrible condition compared to quote unquote American schools. They were underfunded, they had few teachers and many students. Um, There were poor meals, many students in the same classroom, lack of materials. They were essentially used to train students to become field workers and house cleaners for wealthy citrus farmers who made up the school board. These board members literally altered school timings so children could join their parents in the fields to work. And you can see how young these children are in the photo. So, Mexican and American schools were usually besides each other, allowing everyone to see the stark contrast between the well funded rich schools and the lower funded schools. So, I just want to talk about the circumstances surrounding Mendez v. Westminster. In 1930, Mexican American parents in the Lemon Grove School District organized a boycott and successfully sued the school district for integration. But this victory only applied in the Lemon Grove district. In 1944, Gonzalo and Felicitas Mendez, who you can see on the right here, moved to Westminster, California with their children. They tried to enroll their kids along with um, their nieces and nephews at the local school, but were directed to a Mexican school instead, which was farther away and not in their district. Gonzalo insisted that all Mexican American students should be given a quality education, but when the board refused to allow entrance to Hispanic students, The Mendezes, along with four other plaintiffs, sued the school district of Westminster. So the case was heard in 1946 by federal district judge Paul McCormick, and attorney David Marcus, who was the head attorney for the plaintiff side, saw Mendez v. Westminster as an opportunity to defeat all school segregation in California. He called many Mexican American students to the stand, and they testified on the poor conditions in schools and how that affected them. McCormick ruled that the segregation of Mexican Americans violated both California law and the the EPC, or the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The school district appealed the decision, and the appeal was heard by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, and the Ninth Circuit Court ruled in 1947 in favor of Mendez. The court struck down segregation because it wasn't codified, not because it violated the 14th Amendment. So essentially, they're stating if there was a law passed codifying segregation, it would be fine. But because there's no law, then it's discrimination. It did leave open the possibility that the California legislature could pass a segregation law to make it legal, but thankfully this didn't happen. And you can see on the right, Los Angeles Times article talking about the ruling. So Mendez v. Westminster had a really impactful legacy. California Governor Earl Warren outlawed all school segregation in California after the ruling, and he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court during Brown v. Board of Education. And the case was seen as a test case for nationwide legal challenge to segregation by the NAACP. It became a trial run for Brown v. Board, and Thurgood Marshall, who was the lead attorney on Brown v. Board, actually saw this as an example to follow. And he actually followed a lot of the tactics in Brown that were used in Mendez. And it set a precedent that led to future desegregation both in California and across the nation. So on the right here, you can see a mother and her child celebrating the Brown decision. So I just want to finish up with a quick exit slip. What did Mendez achieve? What did it leave unchanged? Do you agree with the conclusions of the first or second decision more? Why? Do you think Mendez deserves the same amount of recognition as Brown? So just pause the video real quick and think about that for a minute. Okay, so Mendez achieved a lot more than it seems at first. So obviously it struck down school segregation in the state of California, but it also showed attorneys what arguments to use to strike down school segregation across the nation. However, it didn't strike down all segregation, and it still allowed for the possibility that segregation, if passed into law, could be legal. I agree with the conclusion of the first decision more because it didn't leave open the possibility for segregation to become legal if codified, while the second decision did. It simply banned all school segregation based off of the Equal Protection Clause. And finally, I think Mendez does deserve the same amount of recognition as Brown because it really paved the way for the Brown decision, and I think it really put school segregation into the national mindset. So thank you once again for joining me today. As usual, I'll be linking the primary source document I made for this lesson in the description. And I hope to see you again soon at another video. Thank you so much, guys.